Welcome to part 2 of a Unit 1, Part 2 review. And here we are presented with a table. Suppose a survey of adults and teens aged 12 to 17 in a certain country was conducted to determine the number of texts sent in a single day. And we first want a relative frequency distribution for adults and teens according to this table. Now, mind you, could you do this by hand? Certainly, but you would have to add up these columns. And well, let's face it, that does take up some time. So let me open this data in Statcrunch, which is this. Right, we have all of our data from that table. And we can easily compute this nicely without having to add everything up, divide, and all that jazz by going to this data option in our menu bar on here, and then go down to compute. And we are going to compute an expression. Okay, and we are going to type in this, and we're going to use the adults column first. Okay, since we're talking about the adults column, we are going to need to enclose the word adults with a capital A in quotation marks. Why? Because we're talking about the column, and we need to name it exactly the way it is on this Statcrunch spreadsheet. And we're going to divide this by the sum of this adults column. So that looks something like this. Okay. Quote adults, divide, end quotes, divide by sum of, and then in parentheses, adults, again, surrounded by those quotation marks. And doing so should give us the relative frequency of that column. And if we hit compute, we should see that. And we have all of our values based on that. And then we would have to round it to whatever number that we need to round it to. Usually 2 or 3 decimals, depending on the question. And then the teens one is exactly the same. Right, data, compute, expression. And this time we are going to use the teens column with a capital T encased in quotation marks. Divide by the sum of that teens column. Again, capital T enclosed in quotation marks. And that should give us, just like this particular column on here now, displaying each of those relative frequencies, which we would then need to then round to, again, either 2 or 3 decimals, depending on the question and what it specifically asks for. I would go back to the page, but the next question asks about a side-by-side relative frequency bar chart, or bar graph, I should say. So this, we need to go to graph, chart, and columns. Right? Now, should be noted that we are going to use what we just calculated for the relative frequencies. So that'll be these two. And that is based on our row labels, which will be a number of texts. And we want these to match what's going to be in the test. This needs to be vertical bars split. And then hit compute. And then we would be given this particular graph to display that relative frequency of adults in blue versus teens in red. All right. And then we're going to be asked a question about comparing the texting habits of adults and teens. So based upon what we see in here, right, the adults being this blue column, they tend to be on the taller side for these lesser amounts of texts, right? And they surpass teens for less than 20 texts per day. Likewise, if we look at the higher amounts of texts, the teens outweigh the adults. So let us quantify that, again, using words in a statement. So that is going to be that adults are more likely to send few texts per day, while teens are more likely to send many texts per day. So for the next question, for the following stem and leaf plot to the right, what are the maximum and minimum entries? And unfortunately, the legend did not get copied over with this, but we could identify a maximum and a minimum. So a maximum, this is going to be based on down here, with the highest number here being this 8. This is going to correspond with the number 48. Again, the legend did not appear on here, but there's 4 with that vertical line, and then 8 would then correspond to the number 48. Likewise, minimum will be based on this one up here to be an 11. For the next question, we have number 5 here. An internet media and research and market research firm measured the amount of time an individual spends viewing a specific web page. The data in this table represent the amount of time in seconds a random sample of 40 surfers spent viewing a web page. And we first want a histogram. So let me open up that data in Statcrunch. That would be this. And we are going to go to graph histogram. Now, if I just keep the defaults for this and just compute this, it's not going to match the graph on the test. So to do that, we are going to start this at the value of 0 and give it a class width of 20. That would match what's on the test. And hand compute will give us this particular graph. And the second part of this question will ask the shape of the distribution. And based on this, right, we have a large amount of observations here on the left. And as we could see, it kind of tails off to the right. Despite the slight increase right here, it still tails off. So because of that tailing off to the right, this is going to be a skewed right distribution. Based on the data. And then finally, a last one. A newspaper article claimed that the afternoon hours were the worst in terms of robberies, and provide this graph in support of this claim. And we want to know, how is this graph misleading, right? And looking at it, I mean, this x-axis here is not labeled, but I mean, that's not going to be the answer for this. Other than that, this y-axis looks fine. We have our title, percent of robberies. I mean, there's really no other way to give that a unit of measurement unless they want to include, percentage here or something. But they have the word. Starting to look at this x-axis though, we start to notice something, right? We have 3 hours, 3 hours, 6, 3, 3, 3, and 3. So this particular one right here is a whole 6 hours. and everything else is a 3-hour time frame. So specifically, not all of the time intervals. The time intervals are the same. Now, all of the time intervals are the same size. Redistributing the time interval so they are all the same size. Same size may lead to a different shape. To a different shape. According to this graph. Let me know if you have any questions or concerns, and good luck on the test.